Hey, y'all, welcome back to the Bait Tank. My name is Anthony. Joining me today is Davis and Caleb, both fly fishing guides from the Midwest, here to talk about some unique native fish species they go after.
Welcome to the Bait Tank, where if it's fishing, we'll talk about it. Whether it's gear, techniques, stories, or the health of our waterways, nothing's off the hook. So grab your rod, sit back, and let's dive in.
How's it going, gentlemen?
Doing great. Thank you for having us.
For sure. So I guess, Caleb, I'll start with you since you reached out to me first. What got you into fly fishing?
Oh man, I've been fly fishing since I was 12. Just turned 30 now, so I got about 18 years of it. I actually kind of started, I grew up in Tennessee, so fellow Tennessee guy here with you. So I grew up really close, like South Holston River, where trout fishing is king. But kind of the thing that made me fall in love with it was there was this little farm pond by our house, and was out there one day throwing plastic worms and Senkos and the like, and some guy showed up there whipping a line around catching bluegills, and I decided that was something I thought looked really cool, and I wanted to learn how to do it. So kind of was super annoying. Probably asked the guy to teach me how to cast that day. Ended up catching a bunch of bluegills, and like the first really big largemouth on a little Betts spider. I'm sure everyone that's fly fish is familiar with that company, but really old school, like little chenille spider bug. And then kind of got the bug there, moved on to smallmouth, and ended up here in Minnesota now, guiding on the big river. So been kind of the passion of my life, I'll say, so far.
That's awesome. What about you, Davis?
Yeah, my story's a little odd too. So I obviously grew up in central Iowa. Spent most of my youth spin fishing, using bait casters, kind of going more the conventional route. But kind of around 2013, I spent 2 years in South Florida with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Oh, nice.
And when I was in South Florida, there was a fly shop just down the road from where my apartment was at. I was stationed on Sanibel Island, so just around the corner was the fly shop. But I took a few casting lessons from the gentleman that owned the fly shop. His name was Norm Ziegler. Taught me some patterns, taught me a few things about how to tie, and then I kind of just went all the way, kind of balls to the walls, and got started with the saltwater gig right out of the gate, which spoiled me rotten. I got home and figured out, it's a little more boring than pulling on snook and tarpon and all sorts of other fun stuff. So,
Sure. Generally speaking, freshwater species are a tad smaller other than the couple oddball ones, right?
For sure, and the saltwater stuff, you'll notice, pulls way harder. So it was an adjustment.
I say my saltwater experience is probably the most limited out of everything, but fly fishing is definitely limited for me too. Me personally, I picked up a fly rod and I was probably 8. I still have never caught a fish on a fly rod. That's just that bad. Something I want to get back into, but I tried for, like I said, probably 6 months or so. Like that summer, basically, I got the fly rod, fished that summer. I was in Michigan at the time, so snow came, fly rod and everything else got put away, and never messed with it again.
You just come hang out with two of us for long enough, and you'll catch as much as you want of any variety.
We can fix that real quick for you.
I got you. So I guess how do you go from just plain fly fisherman to all of a sudden now I'm guiding for it? What was the trigger on that?
I'll take it first, Davis. I guess for me it was I think if you kind of grow up, and Davis has a pretty similar story, you kind of end up doing it, for friends and for family members. I was obviously not a professional at it, but, when I was 14, 15 years old, I was taking people out carp fishing that had never wanted to do it. That was some of the first, I'll call it, guide trips I ever did, were taking people out to catch carps. It's kind of always had a spot for kind of the oddball fish, but, you just do it so much and it kind of becomes a part of who you are. And then we ended up here in Minnesota, and really good fisheries around here. And I spent 5 years in Iowa too. That's where me and Davis ended up meeting at. But just it was a really kind of organic progression for me. Like I went from being in love with it, wanting to spend every second doing it, to you start taking people out, you start realizing, you kind of get to a point where it's not about catching the fish yourself anymore. Like you almost prefer seeing other people do it. That's always, everyone I've ever talked to, the guides, is kind of the moment that that's kind of what you're supposed to be doing, is whenever you start enjoying watching other people do it more. That's definitely where I would say I am. So just kind of being able to share that, kind of what got me into it. I do a lot of beginners up here in Minnesota too, and kind of being able to show people a really unique experience that, it's not the same as flying around the lake on a glitter boat. So we can kind of show a little bit of a different thing.
Glitter boat. I'm glad I'm not the only one that calls them something similar. I think I call them glitter rockets half the time.
Yeah.
I don't fish out of one personally. I know several people that have one, and I have fished out of one, but they're definitely not quite my cup of tea.
Right.
Caleb's 100% right. That's kind of the natural progression of things. For me, it all started with, I was doing so many weird and unique species with fly fishing tackle and even with conventional equipment. Just word of mouth, what you're doing kind of ends up being passed around the community and finds its way up the grapevine. And you get enough people that are interested in doing bowfin stuff or kind of some of the oddities you don't think of when you think of the upper Midwest. And all of a sudden they come out of the woodwork and the guiding thing just kind of brings itself out. So it is really the natural progression of things. You do it for your own enjoyment at first, when you're not doing the guiding half, but then when you have people that they're out there for a bucket list fish, you put them on that fish, they have their big trophy smiles. That's what makes it all worth it. So
Sure. Yeah. Now obviously you mentioned oddball species, and then you mentioned bowfin. What?
Well,
I guess why, right? Everybody knows about the smallmouth. Like you were talking about the Holston, right? Everybody knows about the smallmouth. Everybody knows about the trout. Everybody knows about the bass, bluegill. Lightweight stuff or tiny panfish, stuff like that. But like, I've caught bowfin. You're not doing that with a 3-weight fly rod. So what was the push in that?
honestly, for me, and fly fishing's always been this way for me, but it's more so just challenge yourself. When you do the bait fishing stuff and the conventional gear, the bowfin can be really easy, especially if you're fishing them on cut bait or live shiners or jigs and plastics. But for me, being more interested in the fly fishing half, it was kind of a, how can I bring myself to be able to do this with fly fishing tackle rather than just relying on the conventional equipment, really challenge myself. And it does humble you at first, but you figure out quickly that they really are one of the ultimate sport fish when it comes to targeting something on fly tackle, especially because it's not a species that you can just go out and blind fish. You need to be perfect place, perfect time. The sunlight has to be right. Ecosystem conditions have to be perfect. You got to have good water clarity. So all those things kind of mesh together, and you get a nice happy fish that's a foot below the surface, and you get to throw a fly at it, and 9 times out of 10, if they see it, they're going to crush it. So the challenge of it and timing things right and just kind of the thrill of the hunt is what really brings me to doing the weird stuff like that people forget that we have.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned bowfin. Caleb, you were talking about big mouth buffalo, I believe. That's your oddball.
yeah.
What got you in the big mouth buffalo?
Yeah, when Davis has passed on the Bowfin thing to me here pretty recently too. But yeah, I mean I think it all stems, we're all fly anglers. If you ask anyone, I think the biggest thing that anyone really identifies with the fly fishing, yeah, everything fights harder, but you get such a more visual experience out of it. And like Davis was saying, there's nothing that's better like visually than Bowfin from what I've seen so far. I mean, it's just
I got you.
you see the green light up, and like Davis can speak more to it too. Just like the way they act, every fish has got a personality to it, and like the way they move when they like engage a fly is like I do a lot of sight fishing for bass, a lot of sight fishing for everything else. So just like the approach and watching the tail undulate and stuff, it's just unbelievable. But yeah, that
So my unfortunate experience, I've never seen a bowfin
Yeah.
before I landed it. Every time I've caught one, it's either been in the dark, it's been in some actually muddy water as opposed to clear water, or I found it and so it wasn't even on rod and reel. There was one in particular, I remember it was stuck in a beaver dam, and so I didn't do it. My dad did because I was little, but he moved it from the dam out to the actual lake that was right next to him. It's just some little feeder creek that connected the two local lakes there. But yeah, I've never actually seen one in Clearwater. I imagine, or I've heard stories rather, I should say, about how they're what do they call them? There's lots of names: grinnell,
it's got so
dogfish.
many names.
Yep.
Yeah, snakeheads. Wrong, but
Oh boy.
it's like
Yeah,
you hear.
that's a real fun one here.
I'm sure, and especially since I could be wrong. I'm under the impression snakeheads haven't made it that far west yet, or if they have, it's just now starting. So yeah, I would imagine that's a constant struggle for sure. But as for the green part, you talk about the fins. I'm assuming for the spawning colors. The biggest one I did land wasn't spawning colors, and yeah, the fins are insanely green.
Yeah, they can be that electric green color. I would say the majority of the fish that we catch, especially the big females, they pretty much lack all color whatsoever. They're going to be kind of a plain gray.
Right.
But the dead giveaway when you see one is if you can position a fly or position a bait in front of them, 9 times out of 10 they're committed to eating, but they'll tell you before it happens because their tail undulates. It almost looks like a snake when they go to attack something.
Okay.
It's
So
terrifying.
they'll give you kind of yeah, they'll give you this kind of surprised like something drops in front of them and they go, "Ooh, that's something new. Can I eat that?" And then usually when you get that undulation, the fly just disappears.
I got you. So, is there like a certain fly you guys use for them? Like, is there certain? I'm assuming you guys have a favorite, but is there like one, like maybe a class of them that you prefer to use?
So I would say it's kind of regionally dependent. If you talk to a lot of the guys out of the Great Lakes region, they fish a lot of crayfish patterns and stuff that shows up well in clear water that they can easily see. Well, for us in the Midwest, especially in the upper part of the Midwest, we can fish a lot of tannic or off-colored water. So the majority of the flies I tie are stuff that I can see and that the fish can also see. Because what I want to know is as soon as that fish inhales it, I want to know that the fly is in the back of its mouth. So I pick a lot of flashy colors. I sat a couple next to me here. We can throw game changers at them that are kind of big and pink and white. Everything I tie is on super heavy duty hooks. So like
Can't
target
imagine
grade
why.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
can't imagine why.
they're pretty brutal on equipment. If you've never caught them on fly tackle, they can be rough on gear for sure. But then the majority of our forage in the upper Midwest, most of our bowfin come from the Mississippi River, and shad is going to be the predominant bait fish. So we throw a lot of like EP bait fish and chartreuse and white colored stuff that's going to mimic a shad. But like I said, the nice part about bowfin is they'll typically eat anything as long as they can see it. So we'll even throw goofy stuff at them like game changer crawfish in blacks and purples and other odd colors that we can see really well. So any of that stuff's gonna work extraordinarily well, especially in stained water. And our bowfin fishing usually is at its best when the water's at its highest.
Okay. Okay.
So it
What
it could be real
what's
nasty conditions.
any theories as to why that's the case, or any
They
facts? I guess I should say.
Bowfin really like sluggish water habitats. I usually say, and the guys from Louisiana and the South will know what I'm talking about. You want to find the most stagnant, gross duckweed filled ponds with lots of dead timber in it. And that's usually where the bowfin are going to hang out. And it's because
Okay.
they're partial air breathers. They can survive really terrible conditions for weeks at a time. And in those habitats, the nice part is there are some clear water sections where the duckweed and things break up. So you have spots to be able to sight fish in those sluggish areas. But that's kind of their main forage and spawning areas. They like flooded timber. They like flooded cattails, reeds, canary grass. Anything that has a lot of water and a lot of emergent vegetation is going to have a lot of bowfin in it.
Okay. Okay. Now shifting from bowfin back, I know it's kind of. I know that's your favorite, Davis, and I know that Caleb. You said you're shifting into that more. But you had mentioned the big mouth buffalo. What's the difference, I guess, between those two? I mean, obviously, I'm under the impression buffalo, they're not carp, but they kind of act similar to carp. At least in my experience, we've had smallmouth buffalo here in Tennessee, and I tend to catch them a lot while I'm fishing for carp. So usually it's deeper water, though, right? Instead of shallower water, or is it still a shallow water fish?
So, I mean, we have some really cool opportunities here. Like, that's what I'll speak to. And, like, I started getting really into it while I was in Iowa, too. So I've noticed a lot of the things that I'll talk about that seem to be, I would say, like, regional for sure. I didn't see a lot of it when I was in Tennessee, but I don't know that I was really looking for it. So it may be as much there, too. So every buffalo we catch here is all sight fishing as well. So we do, I would say, pretty strictly topwater oriented fish here. So
Okay.
no deep water at all. So they're, obviously they're the largest sucker species here in Minnesota. There's, I don't know how many dozens of suckers exist here, but big mouth's the biggest one. Obviously super, super old fish. I think they've measured some here getting up to like 80, probably close to 100 years old. Some here in Minnesota. So they're ancient fish. But, the way we fish for them here is like they're filter feeders. But here we have, primarily on the upper Mississippi River. So it's a giant river. It's really big water. Pretty prolific bug hatches, I'll say too. Not
I can only imagine.
Not that the smallmouth seem to care too much unless it's, a certain kind, but the buffalo really seem to like them. So what we look for up here is just these big, back eddy areas. So they'll be really close to heavy current, which can make for targeting them pretty difficult sometimes. So I do 90% of my fishing from a drift boat up here. Which helps a lot. But what we're looking for is these kind of side channels or back eddies, and we always kind of like that foam water, like recirculators. So what happens up here is we get these massive hatches, whether it's, caddis flies or damsel flies sometimes, or, anything, any of the tens of thousands of mayflies that we see up here. All that stuff kind of gets caught up in that backwash area and kind of gets stuck in the foam. So I don't do much trout fishing anymore. But, I kind of take the foam is home approach to buffalo fishing up here. That foam line gets all those bugs stuck in there, and we get these big pods of fish. So instead of throwing to one trout, we're looking at a recirculating foam line there full of 40 or 50 buffalo at once.
I was going to ask about that because I know bowfin's kind of more of a singular fish.
Yeah,
it's
my understanding, they don't
solitary.
really go together. Yeah,
Yep.
whereas buffalo, I know, are always in a group. So
Yeah.
I can imagine that would be pretty entertaining to watch. Do you ever have? I guess in that case, do you ever have more than one fish strike at the fly at once?
No, that's not a thing. But so
Okay.
well, at least not for me. I mean, I've always heard carp are the most picky fish, but I found that carp out of fly can be pretty easy when you get one feeding. It's not the exact experience with buffalo, at least for me. So I mean, you're throwing in a pot of 40, but if your anchor hits too hard from 30 yards away, you aren't going to see
Oof.
those fish anymore. So I mean, I've heard that relative to like brain to body size, the buffalo's got one of like the highest ratios. So, you know,
They're also one of the. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
do whatever math you want to on that of like where they rank on the intelligence scale. But it's almost like when they pop that head up and their eyes come up, it's like they take a picture. And if something's at all different when they come back up again, they spook out. Or if they hear you, they spook out. If your fly line slaps too close, they're gone. So it's probably the most like intricate fly fishing that I've seen up here so far. And so some days it's on. Some days it can be quite a frustration. That's what Davis said. It's one of the biggest challenges that I've seen with the fly rod so far, especially once you get into the bigger ones.
Yeah.
Sure. With that being said, I've not heard any PB mentions. What are y'all's biggest of those species, or maybe your favorite catch? Do you have a favorite catch? I know you said you did saltwater stuff too, so I mean, feel free to throw some out there.
Well, man, I've been all around the U.S. It's so hard to decide. I guess I can speak just on the bowfin half. 2 years ago, usually our bowfin don't exceed 10 pounds. That's a pretty rare fish. 2 years ago, I had one that was 9 pounds 2 ounces. That was on fly tackle.
Wow.
100% sight fishing. But it's kind of cool. So even hearing Caleb talk about the big mouth buffalo side of things, really the equipment that we would use has a lot of crossover in like the lines we would use, the leader materials we could use.
Okay.
Really, one just requires kind of a more delicate presentation, which on Caleb's half is way more challenging than getting a bowfin to eat, just because bowfin are such solitary predators. But yeah, I had a 9 pound 2 ounce fish, and then I did lose one last year on a really steep embankment that I couldn't get a net down to, that was probably in that 10 pound class.
That's awesome.
So on the bowfin stuff, pretty big. Yeah.
Was I think the biggest one I've caught was 7, but that was definitely on a spinning rod, and I was fishing for bass. So, in a kayak at night, because it literally I not that everybody needs to know this too. I have a small YouTube channel, but I was doing this little video, and I literally shut the camera off, did my outro and the cast. While I was doing the outro. As I shut the camera off, put it away, and I started reeling in. It was a Ned rig. He smacked that Ned rig, and I had never seen one in the dark anyway either. And so yeah, it was just big fish. I thought it was a walleye at first because it was just this big golden color. And then I saw the green fin. I was like, no way. And then yeah, I had no net, so that was fun trying to keep it on the line back to the bank. But yeah, I think it was either 7 or 8 pounds. But yeah, it's again heavier tackle. You guys, speaking of fly tackle, you guys are talking about leaders and all this other stuff. Can you, for somebody who's never been into fly fishing, or people that are newer, I guess, and they're looking at what do you talk? I know you guys go into a little bit about the basics about what it is, the difference between what we would call a leader in the spin fishing world versus fly fishing,
Yep.
but then also like maybe explain what level of gear you guys use for those fish.
Caleb, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, the leader is honestly not much difference. I mean, the real big difference in the fly fishing world versus spin fishing world. I know both Davis and I both do a lot of each side of things, so we're far from the purest fly anglers here. So it's it's a pretty similar process, honestly. So the only real big difference is you guys are spin fishing, conventional fishing. Your weight is in the lure you're throwing. If it's a jig or something that's got a big head on it, if you're Carolina rigging, or the weight is in the lure. So for us, it's kind of the complete opposite. While some of our flies do have weight, like a lot of the bowfin flies we fish, they'll be tied with like lead eyes or something you can flip the fly over so you're not getting caught up on the bottom. The hook point rides up. For fly fishing,
Okay.
we're throwing lines that are weighted. So when you see people out there like throwing around, and that doesn't necessarily mean they sink, it just means the mass, instead of being at the end of the rod, it's in the line you're casting. So whenever you see people out there whipping it back and forth, it's basically just like applied physics. You're just bringing the line back and forth. The faster you get the line moving, you can kind of generate that more drive to get the line out there. So you have usually a fly lines, somewhere between 90 and 110 feet, depending on the maker. Once you get past that 90-foot fly line, that's what we call our leader. So usually fly lines, especially like me and Dave are talking about, we're both throwing floating fly lines. Tip floating line tends to be pretty brightly colored. You see a lot of like chartreuses, bright yellows. Some makers do orange. So it's a lot of those bright colors. We don't want to get that super close to the fish, so we'll put a leader on. Similar to like if you had like your 30-pound braid dropping down to like 15-pound fluoro or something like that. Similar process, but our leaders most fly lines come with a loop on the end of them, so we'll do a loop to loop connection to what we call a leader. The only thing that would be a little bit different is our leaders are usually tapered, and that's all to kind of promote that exchange of energy better. Where your leader for like his spinning rods, 6 foot of 12-pound fluoro. Our leaders for my buffalo leader, it's a total of 8 feet, but we taper it. So the whole thing is when you're casting, you want that to roll over. So your butt section starts at say a 40-pound mono, then you'll have 2 feet of that, then you'll connect that to like 2 feet of 30-pound mono, another connection at 2 feet of 20, and your fly is probably tied to like 12. So that's just to get while that flies out in the air, and as it's coming down to the water, that line will flip over and kind of give you that better presentation. And then a lot of people talk about tippet. It's another pretty popular term in fly fishing. Tippet is just, additional line you put on the end of your leader section. That's a lot more popular, I would say, in like trout fishing. Majority of warm water fishing, people just kind of talk about, yeah, I'll taper my leader down to 12-pound or something like that. You don't really hear that. The X system is big in fly fishing, but as many years as me and Davis have fished together, I don't think we've talked about what X tippet are we using too much. So that's, the X system is kind of a fly fishing naming practice where like X equates to like 3-pound tests. But we're usually not throwing anything for Bowfin, probably less than like 16-pound. And then for the buffalo, usually no less than like 12 pounds. So we don't really make it down to the X scale of things. But
now the X scale, is it same as like hooks where the bigger the higher the number, the smaller it is?
Yeah, the opposite. So like,
okay,
like typical like trout tippet would be like 4x, 5x. And I think that's about like 6 or 8 pound equivalency. If you were to do like a 15 or 18-pound test, that's probably closer to like 1x. So the lower the number, the heavier the pound test, like breaking strength would be on the fly side of things.
I got you.
But it's all just in the name of like getting that cast as efficient as you can.
Right. Just to add to that, because just again for anybody who's new to this, when he said he's tapering it, he's going connection like a knot to knot. And he says he's doing mostly loop knots if he can of each section down from the heaviest to the smallest from the fly line. The tippet's going on the very end of the leader, and that tippet, if I'm not mistaken, isn't the tippet also tapered?
Nah, tippet
slightly.
Tippet's
usually tippet's a solid piece.
Yeah, okay. But it's so right. The whole idea is you're kind of like continuing to taper. But yeah, so the only loop knot is the first one. So from the fly line to the leader, and then every taper down is usually like a blood knot or some type of surgeon's knot. So you don't want a bunch of loops out there. You only want the loop at the connection to the fly line to the leader. So your only loop is probably, I don't know, Bowfin leaders are a little bit shorter, I think, usually, but I usually shoot for something like 6 or 8 feet between the fly line and where the fly is going to be. The tippet is tapered like in comparison to the leader usually. So like if your leader ends at 16-pound test, the tippet will probably be like 12.
Okay.
But that tippet is all one size through the length of that tippet section. But we don't usually do, tippets. We usually just kind of end with that line at the end for the majority of our stuff.
I got you. Well, the reason I had asked that, because I thought maybe, and again, it's been so long since I've actually attempted fly fishing. I thought I had saw somewhere that they had sold like a tapered leader that was already like there was no knots in it.
Yep. Yeah,
I guess that's what I was thinking of.
That's pretty common for fly anglers to use that. I think for us, we're deep enough into it. We won't buy tapered leaders straight from the manufacturer. We like to tie our own just because we know our knots and everything are going to hold appropriate for the fish we're catching. Like on the Bowfin stuff, it would be hard for me to go out and find a real short 3 foot fly leader with a piece of like 20-pound wire on the end of it that's like 18 inches long. So that's a kind of a typical leader setup for me is just a 3 foot chunk of 20-pound fluorocarbon with another chunk of 20-pound wire on the end of it.
So you actually do use a steel leader with a fly rod.
I typically do, yeah. On the
Okay.
bowfin, the pike, the muskies, any of that real heavy stuff with lots of teeth.
I got you. All right, that's crazy. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter because well, no. How does that not mess with the casting having a steel leader on the end of that if you're trying to transfer the weight energy forward, or does that
Yeah,
actually kind of help with that? I guess.
usually with the bowfin stuff, the pike stuff, the musky stuff, we're not going to make a super long, delicate cast like Caleb would for a buffalo.
Okay.
So if I slap a cast on the water and it splats, that's not that big a deal. Usually the fish isn't going to spook off because of that.
Okay.
So it's fine to go short leader and have a little wire on the end because I still get enough energy transfer to make a good short cast that's going to be accurate. Where I
Okay.
can kind of get away with it. Now for Caleb, who has to make a 40 foot cast at a fish that's going to eat a tiny dry fly, that's a way different ball game.
So they're using tiny. Isn't the tiny dry fly part you're mentioning is because of the bug hatches you're looking for while you're hunting for them? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say like they're. I guess the way I like to say it is like they're selective but not picky, which is it's kind of a tough way to like talk about, but like they're in an area, they're feeding on kind of whatever's there. So like as long as you get something that kind of floats in the general area, you got a decent chance at them. But a lot of
Okay.
fly fishing comes down to like, do you want to be matching it exactly, or is it more like a presentation focused thing? And I would say like for both species we're talking about tonight, that's pretty accurate. Of like presentation is a lot more important. Like Davis said, Bowfin here eat about anything as long as you can get it in front of them correctly. The buffalo aren't super picky either, but like what I've told people is like it has to be their idea. It's like
I
they're
got you.
that recirculator. I mean, I fish a lot with a fly called a Oh Mister Wiggly. It looks like a damselfly, dragonfly. We get a ton of like the blue damselflies and like dragonflies here on our river. So that tends to be what I use. I found that also works really well for when I have customers here that are wanting to kind of check the list and get the buffalo. It stands out. There's not a whole lot of big bright blue things in that scum line, so it helps a lot, and it really helps to be able to track the fish because I mean, when you're used to seeing a bass blow up on a top water, even like carp and cicadas, like the big sexy thing now. It's a pretty like you see that well. I mean, when these buffalo eat, you don't really get the big. I mean, it's just their lips kind of breaking the surface, so you don't really see a big like obvious take. So you're just kind of looking for that little dash of blue to disappear, and then drive the hook home to them. So it's a pretty different scenario, I guess. But fly choice, like Davis said, his bow fins are pretty broad in the shad and game changers. We do kind of anything that floats and you can see. There's a fly called a chubby Chernobyl. That's a pretty famous, Western trout fly, tied to be just kind of imitator in anything that floats. They look like a stone fly. They look like, a beetle or a hopper or something like that. And that works really well here. I just fish the Wigglers because it's a really good smallmouth fly here, and I go through so many of them a year. I found that the buffalo eat them just as well, so that ends up being a really good crossover pattern for me. And I've usually always got one tied on somewhere, so it's easy to switch that rod over really quick.
I think the one interesting thing that people could get a lot out of too. So as far as rod weight goes, like most of my bowfin fishing is done with a 7, an 8, or a 9 weight, depending on the conditions. Caleb, for his buffalo, even though it's so different, is probably fishing really similar rod weights, even though he's delivering a much smaller fly.
That's just because of the caliber of fish, right?
It can be because
On
of the
average.
caliber of fish, or it can be how you need to deliver the appropriate size fly. And for him, especially if he's catching buffalo on heavy current edges, well, you get a 25-pound fish that eats a dry fly and then goes into 4,000 cubic feet per second water. He's got a problem on his hands.
Yeah.
It makes me kind of jealous. I was like, I would love to try this for sure. I'm about all things fishing. Don't get me wrong, but I live on the Tennessee River. It's a big river. Like right now, they're running 50, well, more than that. I think they're running closer to 60 something thousand cubic feet per minute through the dams right now because of all the rain. Um, even catching 25 pound carp or even 30, 40 pound catfish, where they hit that current, like you said, is a whole different ball game.
Yeah, different world.
Yeah. So I can only imagine.
Yeah, so I mean, our typical situation, like Davis was saying, that we're fishing these edges, and yeah, so I don't fish anything lighter than an 8 weight for the buffalo up here. Just like you said, it's not really because of like the fish as much as just the environment that we're fishing in. So I mean, between like I was telling you, the way our river sets up here, Davis did it with me this summer a lot, and we're sitting probably somewhere between like 10 and 15,000 CFS for the majority of the year. The boat's sitting in that current, and then the fish is in basically zero current. You stick them and you get two head shakes, and they're in the current pretty quickly. So it's all about kind of being able to not really even turn them, but just kind of slow them down enough, and hopefully steer them back into that calm water to end up getting landed. But yeah, like he said, we're our typical fish, like a small one's 20 pounds, and then you can go
Yeah,
way up
that's
from there.
sure. Now, both of these fish you guys are talking about are ancient fish. Now, the bowfin, especially, I think they're like what 130 million years they've been around or something like that.
Yeah, they've been around a long time.
I'm not sure how long the buffalo have been around. Probably, I'm assuming not quite as long,
I
but
don't think
also
it's
they were definitely here first. I'm under also the impression they're unique in the fact they're long lived. I think I saw an article recently about it might have been Minnesota actually, but it also might have been Wisconsin. A certain lake they were doing a um, a study where they were investigating how old they were, and like the majority of the population, I think it said like 90 something percent of the population was over 60 years old.
Yeah.
Like, do you think maybe that makes it, maybe that's why they're so hard to catch is because they're so spooky due to their, I guess, knowledge, or do you think it's just instinct?
I think it just got a lot to do with just like the feeding habits. Most times when we're any fish you're targeting, no matter what it is, you're usually trying to like prey on pure aggression, like bass. Anything that makes it flashes or makes sound or looks like a crawdad or whatever. Everything we tend to do is so based on aggression. But like buffalo don't really have much aggression. And I'll speak directly to buffalo on this one because I know Davis can give a really different answer for the difficulty of both end. But like buffalo are just such a different like approach to eating. Like they're not in a hurry to do anything ever. In Iowa, there's some instances, and Davis can talk to that more because he's down there. But like they talk with people and say, oh, they don't eat, but filter feeders. But like if they're below dams, like they'll eat shad to get chewed up in the turbines, and you can get them that way. But like I don't have that up here, so I mean I'm fishing for fish that they're gonna chill out in that current eddy the whole time. Eat a bug here, pop up again in a few minutes, eat another one. And like and that's kind of the tough part about, coaching someone that's never really done it before. Fishing and fly fishing is a lot more like we're gonna throw a streamer all day, we're gonna get these pretty aggressive chase down from, predatory fish, and that's just not the name of the game for the buffalo at all. You're more, I tell people like whenever we set up on a pod of them, we usually don't make a cast for like 3 or 4 minutes, and that's one to make sure I don't spook them when I drop the anchor because that happens a lot. And if you don't spook them, this I tell people it's almost like a rhythm to it. The fish will come up and maybe come up like 3 or 4 times. You'll see the mouth open, it'll go back down, kind of do a circle on that eddy and come back around and kind of do that same pattern. A lot of people do the same thing with like brown trout. The Holston, you time a fish, it comes up every 7 seconds or something. I don't get that intricate to it, but these fish seem to have kind of an established pattern where they're going to be feeding pretty consistently. I like to watch that and kind of know where they're going to be. What I tell people to do is if the fish is on one side of, I'll call it, its little circular path, I'll tell people to wait till it gets on the far side of that path, drop your fly kind of on our side, the near side of it. And hopefully when that fish comes back around, that's been enough time for it to think it found something. The second you splash one in front of his face, you ain't got a chance. They're gone. So it's kind of almost you want that fly to be waiting for him instead of, surprising him, because there's really no such thing as a reaction strike from these fish. Like they're taking their sweet time. It's almost like, a cow grazing or something. You want to have something, sitting in the grass waiting for it and not, bang one on its nose pretty much. It's a really odd like fishing scenario that, we don't really associate with fishing that much. We're usually, even if you're looking at finesse bass fishing or something like that, when you're down on the bottom or, moving a Ned rig slow or something like that, like they're still coming to find that bait for the most part. And that's just like not the case here. Like they're grazing and you kind of got to hope you can, put something in the grass for that cow to find. And it's just a really different technique. And I think that's a lot of the difficulty in it is they're not really reacting positively. Like the feedback is either you don't eat it or they spook. So it's not really you don't really learn a lot. If your bass comes out and follows a spinner bait or a streamer or something, usually you got to throw back bait ready to go back in there and get them. And you don't really get a throwback here. They either eat it or they spook. So it's a really interesting like chess game, I think, and I think that's what makes them so difficult is just the feeding situation is just a really unique one to fly fishing. In my mind.
Right. So yeah, I think too with what Caleb's mentioned, as far as difficulty of the big mouth buffalo in Iowa, we do see them too, where like he said, in dam systems they're feeding, on dead shad, or maybe they're on a scum line doing kind of the same thing. But we get a few unique opportunities throughout the year where we also get smallmouth buffalo and black buffalo.
Nice.
They come into tributary creeks, and usually our black buffalo are like super gigantic. Like it'd be rare for me to catch one under 20 pounds.
Okay.
But as far as how you change your presentations, from a big mouth buffalo, which is typically a suspended water column feeder or a surface feeder, to a smallmouth buffalo or a black buffalo that's almost entirely bottom oriented. Then we go into the same leader system, the same rod weight and everything that Caleb fishes, except the only thing you change is your fly is going to be a lead weighted, kind of heavily front weighted fly. And
Would you still use floating line at that point?
Yeah, floating line most of the time, because again, it's going to be another sight fishing opportunity where these fish will come in the spring and they actually get on smallmouth and largemouth bass beds, and I've seen them eat the eggs out of the saucer nests.
Wow. Okay.
So what we'll do to kind of keep them out of those places is we'll catch them on like small crayfish patterns or things that would be typical nest raiders on bass beds. And a lot of times we'll drag it through the bed when the fish is approaching. The fish will swim up to the bed, swallow the fly, and then kind of turn around and take off. So,
Okay.
As difficult as the big mouth thing is, usually on a black buffalo or a smallmouth buffalo, it's going to be easier because it's sight fishing, it's bottom oriented, and you're going to be focused on a fish that is driven to eat one specific thing. They can see it, they can swim to it, they can pick it up kind of like a carp would. Whereas a big mouth buffalo, everything's above their head or swimming basically straight into their face or drifting into their face. So the approaches are a little bit different. It doesn't necessarily mean one is incredibly harder than the other, but for sure the big mouths are going to be harder to get the attention of and harder to get a fly to, just because of the way that they feed compared to, even their close relatives that are in the same systems that they live in.
Right. Now, I don't know for sure about West Tennessee, but I know in East Tennessee, all we have is the smallmouth and black buffalo. Both of them I caught. Like I said, my wife and I both, she has the black buffalo record of the house. I have the smallmouth buffalo record of the house, but both of us caught them while we were carp fishing. So, I'm assuming you don't throw corn-shaped flies. I'm assuming, like you said, you use more crayfish style stuff. But yeah.
David showed one or not, but like this is how well you guys can see so we throw these little, I know you post these on YouTube so people can see it. So it's a crawdad here, so it sits with the hook up like that. So we weight the head, so it sits with the claws kind of in that the fence position, sticking up in the air. So that's the kind of like nest raider type of fly Davis is talking about.
I gotcha.
Pretty crawdaddy with these guys, but that's kind of to give you a little the visual what Davis is talking about. It's kind of hard to get the idea, but when you're just hearing it described, but. That's
sure.
Something like that.
Now, I think one of you guys mentioned it. Do both of you guys tie all your flies?
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's cheaper that way.
That's the biggest lie I ever told in fly fishing, but yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Why is that a lie?
It's cost effective and cheaper if you just tie like one fly. If you just get really good at tying like zebra midges and just buy the materials to tie that one thing.
Well, okay, like one type of fly.
If I could pan over, I've got a whole like library system of drawers of every material and bird and rabbit known to man. So I mean, it adds up really quick, but it's tied before I fish, so it's kind of it's worth it to me. But yeah, it's not definitely not cheaper. I don't think. When you fish as much as we do though, and it's just really nice to be able to, like David said, go to a fly shop and ask them for the commercially tied bowfin flies, and let me know how that goes. So
it's one of those that we do things a really specific way for the fisheries that we are on, and for us to be able to adapt stuff to fit that fishery appropriately, it makes a lot more sense for us to make our own streamers and our own flies. Just because we know the water, we know the conditions, we know what the fish are going to do. And a perfect example is, I have a lot of places in kind of north central Iowa where I could fish game changers for smallmouth bass and pike and whatever else. But my success rate, if I go 2.5 to 3 hours north, is going to be way better with game changers than in the northern part of Iowa. So even the patterns themselves, depending on where you're at regionally, you'll want to change and adapt your stuff to be able to best match your forage. And for me, the game changer stuff just doesn't work as well as it does, on large systems where bait fish are the main food source.
I mean, just to explain that a little bit, I know we're throwing around a lot of names, and if you're not, fly as big into the fly scene, Game Changers is, probably the most popular. We've thrown streamers around and bait fish, so it's a fly that's actually got vertebra to it. You tie on these little metal shanks, so when it strips through the water, it actually swims like a fish. You think of a fly usually just like a one hook fly. There's one hook in it, but there's usually like 5 segments to it. So you got a tail, and then you got little spines going up the fly. So when you strip it through the water, it's actually swimming. So it's actually got like a backbone to it. It's the most realistic bait fish fly probably ever designed. It's kind of came on the scene here in the last 10 years, but Davis keeps referencing game changes for a bunch of different stuff, and that's
the equivalent to the Alabama rig.
I'll grab one real quick.
It'd be a lot like throwing a swim bait for
I guess that makes more sense. Yeah, like a glide
a guy that's using conventional equipment. But as far as how
you can see all the different, it's got like 5 different segments to it, so instead of just being on one hook.
Because like you said, if it was just a single hook, it definitely wouldn't swing back and forth like that. It would just kind of.
So it's just the hook in the front, but that's got 5 segments behind it. So kind of have an idea how much that's going to move when you strip it through the water. But that's kind of
I watched it. Not to muddy the waters, I guess, but there's a guy in Europe I've watched that he uses those for pike over there. His are like a foot long, though. I mean, is it really just one hook in the front? There's not another hook anywhere else in there? I mean, I would think you'd miss some fish that way, right?
Usually they'll run tandem hooks on those, one in the front and one kind of towards the middle. If you put it too far back, it won't swim right. But the benefit that they have over in Europe is a lot of their pike, when they eat a fly, they're going to swallow it head first, and they usually swallow the whole thing.
Okay.
So that front hook, they have a lot of hookups on. But, for me in the central part of Iowa where the climate is drastically different, I get a lot of, even our big pike, our 40-inch plus fish, our tail grabbers. So on all my big pike flies, I run stinger hooks on all of them because most of the time I end up not having that fish totally inhale the fly. So it does have its benefits to run 2 hooks. And in Europe, too, it could be one of those where they have a single hook regulation where you can't run any stinger hooks towards the back of the fly. Some of them run barbless hooks only. So you can only have one single barbless hook in the front depending on where you're at. Yeah, it just kind of depends.
And then was one thing. On my side of things, it's kind of the complete opposite. The majority of my game changer type flies, we're fishing for. I tell people if you really want a chance at, smallmouth of a lifetime, I don't think there's a better place than the Mississippi here in Minnesota to do it at. I mean, we're fishing a fly that big, and you won't see this fly in the fish's mouth usually when it eats it. Like we don't get the tail grabbers that Davis is talking about. So I mean, I don't put a tail hook on it just as kind of an ethical thing for me up here. Like,
sure,
you're gonna see that, and it's gone. I mean, even the average fish up here is 2.5, 3 pounds usually. That fish is gonna swallow this thing, and then we've caught them up to 6.5, 7 pounds, and you don't really get a tail nipper on any of the fish up here. It's just one big engulf it. So none of my streamers are 2 hooks up here just because you end up doing more harm than good. They get it too deep, and that's an old fish too, and it's kind of they're my buddies up here. I don't want to, big digging hooks out of one's throat if you don't absolutely have to. So it's kind of kind of knowing your fish, knowing the fishery, and knowing, what you really need to get it done. But like David said, we live about 3 hours apart, and it's like fishing 2 completely different worlds whenever we'll go fish with each other. Just the difference in forage types, the difference in like how we fish for the same fish is just so different, 3 hours apart.
So another thing, I guess you touched on the whole ethical part of it, right? When it comes to fisheries conservation, how do you guys feel fly fishing, I guess, benefits, or maybe even doesn't benefit? Is there benefits to fly fishing versus conventional tackle in terms of fish health and fishery health, in your opinion?
Oh boy, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
It would, honestly, I think it depends on just who the fisherman is. Yeah. In any given circumstance. I would say this, as kind of elite and as high as fly fishermen hold themselves, ethically when they're on the water, I've found a few of them to be like some of the worst when it comes to fishing over the top of you, snagging fish just for the clout and the glory and the fame. But there's a lot to be said for bait fishermen and stuff doing the same thing. So really, I think it's just a person thing. I don't think it's
Yeah.
one of
That's
those
a
that,
technique thing. I got you.
yeah.
The problem
gotcha.
that I see, and like, on the fly fishing side of things, like obviously, I think the catch and release mentality is a lot more prevalent on the fly fishing
Yeah.
side of things.
Agreed.
Like,
Totally
that
agree.
I will say.
Okay.
I mean, like we talk a lot about, Davis has pointed out, like I've, seen a lot of issues here that like overfishing, obviously it's a problem you hear about everywhere else in the world, but I feel like as usually you don't tend to see that as much on the fly fishing side of things. Not saying it doesn't happen, but I feel like the catch and release like culture is a little bit more prevalent. But the other thing that's also more prevalent is people, people want to make fun of it as much as they want. They want to say fly fishing such a more like in the whippy stick or the pixie stick or whatever you want to call it, and people kind of associate it with you're using a lot lighter line, and like that's something else that like I know Davis and I both try to preach pretty hard on about like you're fighting a fish. It's a way different fight. What I can land out a fly rod is probably going to take you a lot shorter time to land on a spinning rod. With that comes just inherent stress on the fish you're targeting. So
Yep.
I see what a lot of people do up here. I mean, it's not a niche fishery that I have, but it's one that's a little bit different for people. Most people that come up, and book a trip with me, they're usually trout fishermen that really want to try the warm water deal. Fly fishing, I think it's a really nice change of scene, but it's kind of been romanticized as it's Brad Pitt in Montana shadow casting. People associated with trout fishing a lot more. I think that's even in the 15 years I've been doing it, that's changed a lot. I mean, Orvis made carp lines for a while, so I mean, it's a pretty big change in that. But I think a lot of that inherent trout mindset is still there about we're going to bring a 4 weight to the Mississippi and try to fight a 21-inch smallmouth on it, and you might be able to do that, but that's a really easy way to kill a fish too.
Right.
You're fighting something for so long, you're taking so much energy out of that fish that it might swim off when you put it in the water, but it's going to be
Doesn't mean
dead
it'll make
50
it.
yards downstream. So I mean, I think that's the biggest.
Yeah.
Also, like I don't think overfishing is as big a deal as that I see here, but just like being ethical of like how you target a fish. When you're fishing for a big fish and heavy current, like fish the right gear. Don't bring your trout rod up to do either one of the types of fishing we're talking about, because though you might be able to beat your chest and say you did it on a 3 weight, you're leaving a trail of dead fish down below you. So I mean, I think that's
But
the
I think,
biggest.
I think, sure. The argument being, obviously, if you do that once in a blue moon, like, oh, hey, it was an accident, sure, you have the story, right? But I'm with you. I don't think if you're knowing your fishery, knowing what you're going for, you shouldn't be purposely trying to put all the fish through that stress. So I
Yeah,
get that
that's
entirely.
that's my only high horse moment, I think, on the fly fishing side of things. Is just try to. That's a big thing that I try to push. But whenever you're gonna do these trips and like target a new fish, target a new species, like try to do it as respectfully as you can. Do your research. Or like, especially like, if you book a trip with one of us, like we're gonna have the equipment needed to not only do it like efficiently in the best way, but also the most like ethically way possible of using the right size rod, like Davis said. I don't think either one of us has anything lighter than a 7 weight with us on a trip up here. That's kind
Yep.
of the bottom end of things. That gives you the backbone to turn over these flies, fight the fish, land them quickly, get them back in the water as quick as you can. So that's a major part of it, I think, of just like ethics of fly fishing. I think that's kind of the biggest. If I had to, nitpick something that I see a lot, people want to catch something on such a light line. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
We did. Caleb and I did make the mistake of fishing together once, and I brought a 6 weight with me on the Upper Mississippi, and it was what we call a Euro nymphing rod, which is you kind of use a tight line, almost like a jigging technique, to be able to move your fly. But I hooked the biggest smallmouth I've ever hooked, and I know it's one of the biggest Caleb's ever seen out of the river. But I hooked him on the 6 weight, and the noise that the line made when that fish caught the current and shot about 80 yards downstream is unlike much I've ever heard before. It came out of the guides and just went twink, 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 all the way out of the end of the rod.
He looked
Wow.
over and said, "That's a carp," and it's not. No.
Okay. Jeez.
But yeah, it ended up being a big smallmouth. We got her netted and landed it fine, but we probably fought it longer than we should have. So it's one of those ethical things. Like, you live and you learn. Fish survived. Everything went well. We netted it, took it out of the water for one picture, and then off she went.
And you'll never forget that sound or the fish. So
That was a giant.
Yeah. Right. So for me, I guess the the feel bad moment for me, I guess, was actually I was fishing. I was going for small striped bass and for smallmouth and largemouth, and right below the dam. So I'm using 17-pound line, jigging spoon, and I hooked into a. The longer fight was actually the 25-pound paddlefish,
Oh, yeah.
but the bigger fish, it was a 30-pounder. It was only like a third of the time. I don't know if it's because of the end of the day and they were tired, or if it's just because I know some fish don't fight the same aggression wise, I guess, based on their size and whatnot. But yeah, no, that 25-pound fish on the 17-pound line, which isn't that big of a difference, I guess, really. But in that heavy current, I probably fought a lot longer. I probably should have too. But to my knowledge, it was fine and swam off and everything. But yeah, it was a long fight for sure.
Yeah, going off talking about Caleb's mentioned some of the ethical stuff with fly fishermen too. Now that I've had a chance to kind of sit here and think a little bit longer about it too, I would say as far as being outspoken for water quality and the preservation of public land and the importance of conservation on cold water streams, I would say that fly fishermen are by far more outspoken.
Okay.
And I think probably are better advocates for restoration and conservation of really important fisheries, whether that be here in Iowa or out west when they're dealing with salmon fisheries. I feel like fly fishermen are kind of at the forefront of those conservation efforts, whereas your conventional people may not be as gung ho about the preservation of a lot of those places. And we see some of that here in Iowa with, like, we're in a big phase right now where our Department of Natural Resources is removing a lot of the dams so that the fish and the mussel populations can kind of re-inhabit some of the upstream reaches that they haven't been able to access in the past 70, 80, almost to 100 years. And we've had a lot of kickback from the conventional guys, but a lot of the people that are involved in the fly fishing clubs and understand the conservation half realize the importance of kind of reintegrating those fish into their native stretches. And we get a lot of complaints from the guys that are sitting below those dams and they've been their honey holes for 50 years because all of a sudden the fish disappear. Well, it's not because they disappear, it's because they spread out and they go back to the places they should be rather than being trapped below the dam.
Right. I commonly joke with people, but people ruin everything.
Yeah.
So it's just the way it is.
I think it's really cool too. And just like, again, we talked about, we live 3 hours apart, but it's like the difference, into Minnesota. Like, obviously you're familiar with it. You're, on the rough fish group there. Like, Minnesota is such like a, I'll call it a forward thinking fishing community here. Like, even outside of the fly fishing group, I mean, we have the rough fish,
they got regulations for rough fish. I mean, what more could you ask for?
That's pretty cool.
Tyler Winter and his, the bill that, he's been pushing, pretty hard. I think it's been now approved. He would be a great person to, talk more about that side of things, but just the whole no junk fish bill and getting all that, approved here in Minnesota has been like enormous. I mean, like, I can go to these spots where, we do a lot of like sucker fishing here. And I go to places here and, there's people that are willingly targeting that fish and like promoting that fish. I mean, Davis here, says sees a lot of that, the fly fishing side. But I think here in Minnesota, it's even different, like across one state line.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree.
Cared for. Yeah, like how well, we do kind of promote, these rough fish species, and they're like no want and waste. So it's just so different that two states that can be so close together, from my experience. I mean, I think Minnesota's done such a great job of promoting that, side of things, fly fishing and conventional fishing. So it's really refreshing to like be a part of a state like that. And, I've really, really enjoyed that, aspect of the community up here that, you can talk to people about bowfin fishing here, sucker fishing, buffalo fishing, and like people actually be interested and not just say like, it's fertilizer for my garden.
And that's a lot of what we get in Iowa is, you may
there's a lot of that in Tennessee too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we actually get a lot of just toss up on the bank too. Not to go on a tangent, but one of my biggest issues I have with the bow fishing community here in Tennessee is, oh, hey, I filled up a 55-gallon trash can of fish all night, and then I just dumped it at the boat launch and left. I'm like, come on, man. You can donate it to the homeless shelter. You can donate it to the food bank. You can donate it to, I mean, I'm sure there's 100 other places you could put it. But you said, or even as fertilizer, at least if it's fertilizer, it's not rotting on the bank and ruining the boat launch for everybody else.
Well, at a place like Tennessee is not the only place you see that. I had a day last year. I had a group of buddies of mine. We were doing a bowfin trip together. We pulled up to a ramp on the Mississippi, and sitting next to the ramp was an emptied 55-gallon drum of nothing but bowfin, drum, and gar that guys had shot right there, on the river on the main channel itself, and they dumped them right off the side of the boat ramp. And we called them in, just to have and it was actually on a section of federal refuge. So we
Jeez.
actually had,
Okay.
so we had the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service come out and take a look at it and just investigate, but they kind of kept a closer eye on it for the rest of the year. So it's kind of a widespread issue for sure with the waste of native fish like that, which is really unfortunate because the three species I just listed there with the gar and the bowfin and the drum, if you get those on fly tackle, light tackle, all three of those varieties of fish are just phenomenal sport fish if you treat them as such.
Sure. And, again, you were talking about the Minnesota being further ahead with the regulations on the rough fish, and you talking about, the acknowledging that they can be a really good sport fishing opportunity. It's just about information, man. It's the flow of information, I think, is the biggest hurdle. You have all these people that are, granddaddy told me that those are garbage fish, or granddaddy said these are the reason why the bass aren't here anymore. And it's just like, if you just actually took a second to read something or learn something, you would understand that, hey, fish don't always sit in the honey hole. They do move. The things change. The environment changes. They're going to move. The different times of year even. You're not going to catch the same kind of fish in the same spot all year round. So it's definitely a hurdle.
The wildest part that I see about it, and I think Davis will back this up too, obviously fishing is, as much as we don't want to admit it, like social media plays a big part of fishing. Like we're both business owners now, like trying to promote this. Like you have to be present on it. And I've just noticed like over the last few years as I've like upticked in, my posting and like kind of more advertising trips for these weird fish, I can post a video or a picture of a, 6-pound smallmouth that would be anyone's fish for their whole lifetime. And it'll do okay. Davis came up here a couple weeks ago, and we were catching bowfin in January in Minnesota, open water fishing. You make that one post, and like people, I get more messages about where was that caught at? How did you do that? Like people, like it's like people are so starving for something different. Of just like
sure, and it's a good thing, I think, for the most part.
It's an awesome thing, but it's just such like a. I don't want to say it's a new development because I mean people have been talking about bowfin fishing for 20 years, but probably even longer than that, even longer than I'm aware of. But it's just like we have such fish that people become so accustomed to, trophies of that fish, however cool they are. That bowfin we posted was like 2 pounds. It was a little one.
Yeah, teeny tiny baby thing.
Went absolutely nuts about it just because it's something different and like you're doing it in a way that people are so like resonating with. So that I don't know how new of a development that really is. And like I post buffalo pictures and post a video of someone fighting a buffalo, or we posted a video of like a big pod feeding and everyone's like, where is that? I really want to do that. Like that's so different. That's so unique. And it's like this stuff's been here a long time. So like it kind of makes you think of like what's driving this sudden, not sudden, but this development of like people wanting to chase these weird fish. Like it's a really cool like moment to be a part of in fly fishing, I guess. I mean,
sure.
I know everything ebbs and flows, but like seeing this prevalence put on these, kind of underdog oddball species, especially here. I'm sure people are doing all over the country too, but it seems like the Midwest gets, a pretty fair amount of, drive for people targeting this weird stuff. But it's just been super cool to like just watch the reaction, just even on social media. And I'm sure Davis has got stories, galore about that stuff too that I'm sure he could share. But it's just been something as like the majority I focused on is smallmouth, and then the more I've kind of branched out and done these other things, like the amount of people that are just so like all about it so fast it's been really cool to see.
Yeah, I get more response, same as Caleb with. So like last February, we had a great run of shovel-nosed sturgeon. I had 2 or 3 messages a day. Hey, I want to come do that. Hey, I want to come do that. Hey, I want to come do that. So, I'd take new people out every week, or, if I was unavailable, I'd at least tell them, okay, this is kind of what you're looking for, what you're doing. Everybody had success. It's one of those weird fish. They don't fight great, but it's such a unique animal that you don't see all the time. They draw a lot of attention, and it's the same with the bowfin thing that I do. I get a lot of attention with the invasive carp stuff. So doing silver carp and bighead carp, people have a real fascination with the odd invasives. So I get more messages about that than doing, pike and smallmouth bass and any of your typical sport fish. So just kind of a fascinating development.
Well, and like you said, we were talking about the flow of information, right? There's a ton of information about the smallmouth bass and pike and all that stuff, and a million YouTube channels or whatever doing just that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you guys having that unique perspective. I mean, it's cool that you guys see the response, and I can understand. Even myself, I for forever was a normal, oh hey, I'm gonna go fishing for bass, pike, walleye, kind of guy. And
Mhm.
as I got older, I'm like, cool, I'm gonna try some of this other stuff. And it's like, if you really, especially if you expand your gear selection, right? I mean, obviously, I'm not going to take a medium heavy catfish rod and go after crappie with it, right? But adjusting the gear for your area you're fishing, the species you're going after, you get a lot of fun and a lot of unique stuff for sure. Um, the Bowfin for me, the first one was an accidental catch, but ever since then, I wish I could figure out where these are more. I found one. The area I live in Tennessee, my wife actually hooked into one while we were doing an overnight crappie trip under a green light, and it about blew my mind because I was like, I thought she hooked into like a small flathead or something because we've done that before. And then it came to the surface of water. And she's like, it looks like a snake. And I looked over just as the line broke. I'm like, that was a bowfin. Like, man, that was a bow. It was so a bowfin. And
Yeah, it's just crazy, like how like it seems like the reaction around your first one always like kind of shapes it a lot. I mean, my first one was on Bowfin was on Okeechobee. I didn't know had any idea what it was, and like when I was telling people about it, I was just told that was gator bait because we were the guy carried a bat with him, and every single
yep,
one that as soon as he flipped it over the side, it got hit with a Louisville Slugger and thrown to the Gators in Okeechobee, and like that was what I knew about Bowfin until spent a lot more time around them. Got to really appreciate it for how cool of a fish that is. And while fishing them in murky Florida is a little bit different than what we had the chance to do up here. It's just like that just shows. I mean, that was 15 years ago, I bet, when I saw my first one, and now we got Davis runs a business with a lot of prevalence based on that, and books up for it. So it's been really cool. I mean, I know like there's been big changes in olive fishing with the different advancements in electronics, braided line and trolling motors over the years. But it's cool to kind of be doing it pretty actively and playing at least a small part, and hopefully that switch over. It's just a
sure.
really cool time.
Well, speaking of booking trips and whatnot, if anybody was listening to the show and wanted to hook up with you guys or was in your local area, where would they need to go?
You want to start, Davis?
So the easiest way to get a hold of me, I'll let you post it with video and everything, but just by my Instagram is probably the fastest way to access me. So it's just Davis_Horton_IA. So I'm based out of Iowa. Travel all over Iowa and fish for all sorts of stuff. I'll let you attach my cell phone number too. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me to do some weird, unique stuff, I'm the first person ever to catch fish in all 99 counties in Iowa. So if you want to spot literally anywhere in Iowa, I'm the guy to go to.
He's got a pretty sick plaque that shows he did it too.
Yeah, I do.
Cool.
I've got some stuff that goes with it, but yeah, by email, by my Instagram, or by my cell is going to be the easiest way to get a hold of me. And the kind of the business I run outside of my normal job is called Flyover Outfitters, and I just specialize in pretty much any species you'd want to do, but kind of the big focuses are pike, smallmouth bass, bowfin, and then some of the oddities that are a little bit trickier to find.
I got you. What about you, Caleb?
Yeah, so kind of same stuff. Instagram's probably the quickest way to get me. That's at Regal_Beagle_fly fishing. Facebook as well as under Regal Beagle Fly Fishing as well. Email works too. It's the same thing, regalbeagleflyfishing@gmail.com. So if you just Google Regal Beagle Fly Fishing, you'll get all the links that pop up pretty quick. There's a website too. You can browse. Like David said, so I'm based out of the Minneapolis area. I live about 30 miles south, but do the majority of my guiding is based out of like Western style drift boat fishing. So just like the boats you're used to seeing on South Olson and things like that. So we do drift boat fishing on the upper Mississippi. Specialty is definitely the trophy smallmouth, kind of from May into November. Ton of fish, ton of big fish, but we also do. The numbers are growing, which is awesome, about people wanting to do these kind of oddball things with the bowfin and do a lot, which is like common carp here as well. Or sorry, not bowfin, the buffalo. A lot of common carp too. So kind of tailor towards mostly warm water species, pike. I don't do walleye, so hopefully that's not going to offend people in Minnesota. It's just been a sticking point here. Yeah, it's tough.
We catch them by accident. Walleyes are total accident on
yeah, it's really tough
on trips.
I imagine they're kind of hard to catch on fly. I mean, unless you're fishing
You'd
at
be
night, right?
surprised.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had a couple years ago where we specifically targeted them with fly fishing tackle. Um, it would surprise you how big the walleyes are that you can catch on fly fishing equipment, even in Iowa. I had
Okay.
two falls ago that was like 27 and a half.
That is a good walleye.
Yeah, and it was a fall fish, so it was a fat fish.
Right.
Pounds,
But
right, David?
say that again.
Is that 27 pounds, right?
Yeah, right now 27 pounds. I wish. I wish. It'd be more like in that 6.5 to 7-ish pound range. So
Still a good walleye for sure.
darn right.
But yeah. Well, is there anything else you guys want to add about fly fishing for oddball species? I know you guys are both guides and everything, but is there anything we didn't cover that you want to bring up or point out for somebody who's considering it?
I mean, I think the beauty of doing the native fish or what you would call rough fish thing is as much as people catch them as bycatch on bait, we can target almost any of those rough fish or the native stuff on fly fishing tackle. I mean, I have parts of the year where shorthead red horse, golden red horse, silver red horse are all targetable on fly tackle if you just have the right kind of water conditions and the right tributary creeks and things to find. There's no kind of limit to what we can do as far as unique species stuff with the native things. So, if you want to get out there and try something new, I encourage anybody to go out and grind and try to find some of those unique things that you don't see very often because most of them are willing to take flies. Paddlefish and some of the other oddities that you can't necessarily sight fish real well might be a little more of an anomaly, but consistently we can do some of the weird things, even freshwater drum and long nose and short nose gar, all sorts of good stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What about you, Caleb? Got anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think just more what David said. It really gives you an opportunity too to just I know people are big thing with fly fishing and fishing in general is like that search for solitude with people, and as more people get into it, it's a great thing. But our waterways are getting more crowded. The places where the typical trophy species are the more things that people target all the time. We can go to these places and target these kind of oddball fish, and hardly ever see anybody else. So it kind of really gives you an opportunity to get that more private experience. Be out there targeting something that no one else is doing. So I really think it can give you a lot better enjoyment of an area, especially if you're I live in I'm pretty close to downtown Minneapolis. We can be fishing in the middle of the cities and be targeting all kinds of these cool fish. So it's a really cool opportunity. One other thing I'd add about both of us too, if you are looking to come to Iowa or Minnesota and fish and you don't fly fish, not a problem for either one of us. So we can we spoke the whole thing about fly fishing, but all these things are easily targeted on spin fishing too, as well, or on the conventional side of things. So we both do a lot with beginner anglers too. If you're a conventional angler that really wants to try fly fishing for any of this stuff, or spin fishing for anything too. So we're pretty adaptable to working with you wherever you are.
Nice. Now, I have two confessions to make. One, you already heard, I've yet to catch a fish on a fly rod, but two, other than a smallmouth buffalo and a black buffalo, I have never caught a sucker on a rod and reel of any kind.
Boy.
Oh, you did. You come anywhere to northern Iowa or anywhere in Minnesota, we can change that in 20 minutes.
I want to say I've been trying.
Consider
all
making
year.
a trip out here this year.
If I could, I definitely would. Obviously it depends on schedules and work and family life, but yeah, no, I would definitely be down for meeting with you guys and going fishing for sure.
Yeah, it's we're pretty fortunate to have the diversity that we do in the upper Midwest, and like Caleb was saying, there's as much as we've talked about fly fishing, I think the two of us would tell you if you want your big numbers fish days or you want to definitely catch the fish that you are after, especially if it's kind of a rare one, we cross over and do the conventional stuff all the time too. So as much as we kind of lean towards the fly fishing half, there's no reason you can't come do a lot of this stuff with conventional stuff. Matter of fact, if you told me I need you to go out right now and catch a bowfin, I'm going to pick up conventional tackle before I pick up a fly rod, because the fly rod stuff is almost exclusively fly target or sight fishing with fly equipment. So with the conventional gear, I can just do it however I want, plastics, bait, whatever. So
that's awesome, and I get it. I definitely get it. Well, gentlemen, I do appreciate you guys coming on tonight, talking to us about native fishing for native fish fishing by fly fishing, and also through the conventional stuff you talked about, but also kind of highlighting the conservation side of things and the emphasis on native fish versus some of the more popular sport fish. I mean, obviously we met on a rough fish group, which specifically was for dealing with what these species that are native, or even some that are not native but just are considered trash and aren't really trash, and it's just a mindset thing. And I do appreciate you guys coming here and putting more emphasis on that. With that being said, again, before we go, anything else you want to add? Even if it's not even related to the topic, is there anything you want to just jab the bear at anybody or anything? I mean, is there some pet peeve you want to get off your chest? I mean, what you got?
Thank you for giving us the time to kind of come on here and talk about something like this. I think it's really cool that podcasts are taking note of these species too. So thank you for the opportunity.
Sure.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, I'm in the same boat. It's not very often, you have a group of people that can get together and talk about the good native stuff that most people toss on the bank. So we're excited to get to talk about some of the really important, cool native species that we've got. So we appreciate you having the two of us on. That's pretty cool.
Well, I appreciate you guys reaching out. And I guess that's it, guys. Until next time, you've been watching The Bait Tank. Remember, if it's fishing, we'll talk about it. And we'll see y'all again very soon.